Shalom Aleichem, volume 27, Emor, Sicha number 2, the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, sanctify God's name, even giving up one's life for being a Yid. And it's the source of it is in today's Parsha, V'nigdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. I'll be sanctified, I'll be holy amongst the Jewish people, the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. Now, it's pointed out the source for it, nominally in Torah Shebal Peh, is in Toras Kohanim. It's a medrash, it's a classic oral Torah, and Toras Kohanim says, surrender yourself, mesoid atzmecha b'kadesh shemi, surrender yourself, and be prepared for Kiddush Hashem, to give up your life. And he continues, from here we learn that if you surrender yourself, expecting a miracle, al manas, you're doing it depending on a miracle, the miracle won't happen. If you surrender yourself not depending on a miracle, it will happen. He goes on and on, as we'll revisit it later. Rashi and the Rambam are commentaries, much later commentaries, to the Toras Kohanim. You know, maybe 800 years later, it's a different era. And they are based on the Toras Kohanim. That's their source. Toras Kohanim, Medrash, classic oral Torah. Rashi and Rambam are commentaries, Rishonim. But they derive it from Toras Kohanim, but they quote it differently. You might say they misquote it, which is very common because they're trying to bring out certain things in their own way of learning. Let's assume the Toras Kohanim is saying the way it is, in a sense, ultimately. Rashi is giving it interpretation on the Pshat level, and Rambam is giving it interpretation on the Halachic level. And the Rebbe analyzes it. You know, if you read it without too much close looking, you can say they're just quoting it a little different. But the Rebbe, of course, takes very seriously all the words of Rashi and Rambam, and that nothing is around them at all. So Rashi says, surrender yourself, prepare to die, because it's done on condition of a miracle, the miracle won't happen. This is very similar to the Toras Kohanim. But notice that the Toras Kohanim says both sides of it. If you surrender depending on a miracle, it won't happen. But if you don't, if you surrender not looking for a miracle, it will happen. Rashi doesn't say that second side. That's so curious. Rambam says when the law says die and don't transgress, because we know that there's certain laws, most of Yiddishkeit, you're supposed to transgress and not die. The language is, Yaved v'al yedek. You're not supposed to let yourself be killed for most mitzvahs. Saving a life overrides everything. But there's only 3 mitzvahs: idolatry, adultery, and murder. And in those cases, the language is yerek val yaver, die and don't transgress. It's a very high level, and but that's what's expected. So if a person does that the law says die and don't transgress, and he does it, he made a Kiddush Hashem. Rambam doesn't say anything about depending on a miracle, expecting a miracle, not expecting a miracle. Even though it seems very clearly that his source is also the Toras Kohanim. So why the difference? That's question 1 that the Rebbe has. It's line 9 on my screen. And the question 2 the Rebbe has, let's analyze the Toras Kohanim. I don't understand. The Toras Kohanim is saying that it's important that when you surrender yourself, you shouldn't be depending on a miracle because it won't work. What kind of surrender is that? The mitzvah is Kiddush Hashem, which nominally, according to all opinions here, means to surrender. I'm ready to die. So why would you think that the person is surrendering expecting a miracle? That the Toras Kohanim has to say surrender, but don't expect a miracle because it won't work. Like, how is that surrender to begin with? It's very, very strange. The 2 questions of the Rebbe, but they're loaded questions. And the Rebbe is going to come along and analyze and say that there's 3 ways to look at this mitzvah. Toras Kohanim, Rashi, Rambam. Toras Kohanim says the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem has 2 steps. Number 1 is, I'm supposed to surrender, prepared to give up my life. God forbid we should never be tested. This is an easy subject to talk about. It's a much harder subject to deal with in real life. We should never know it. I'm supposed to surrender to give up my life for Emunah. But the goal is not that I should die. The goal is that we should make a miracle. Hashem should make a miracle and save me. And that's the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. From Toras Kohanim, it comes out very clearly. It's a 2-step process. Step one is what I do. I'm prepared to die. Step two is what Hashem does, which is part of the mitzvah, though. I need to, through my surrender, cause that Hashem should make the miracle, and then I did the mitzvah fully. If I give myself over to death and I'm actually killed, it seems from him that's not the fullest level of Kiddush Hashem. It is to some degree, but it's not the fullest level. The optimum Kiddush Hashem is I give myself over to die without the intention of being saved, because if I then I will likely possibly have the miracle. And that's why he's so wordy. Surrender yourself for Kiddush Hashem. But the goal is that you should live so that everyone should see the miracle. Then the mitzvah is done fully, because he sees the miracle as having two steps: your surrender and Hashem's miracle, which you trigger. If you don't trigger it, it's not actually accomplishing the mitzvah fully. Now, we know the principle is that if I'm doing the mitzvah, but I am expecting to be saved, it'll not work. So therefore, the Titus Kainim spells it out for you. Surrender yourself. But if you're depending on a miracle, it won't happen. So surrender yourself without depending on a miracle, and then it could happen. And now you did the full mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. So this answers the Rebbe's second question. Surrendering, expecting a miracle, is not a contradiction to surrender, because according to him, Kiddush Hashem means that you get saved. Of course you're expecting a miracle. If not, it's a violation of Hashem's name. It don't look good for God if we get killed because we believe in him. Kiddush Hashem is that if you surrender and you live. The problem is, though, we want to make sure that you live. And you have to have a zchus to have such a miracle. It doesn't happen to everybody, unfortunately. One of the keys is that if I think I'm going to be saved, if I'm only doing it thinking that Hashem's going to save me, we all know the story of Haran and Abraham. Abraham went into the fire thinking he's going to get burnt, and he was saved. Haran went in thinking that he'll be saved, and he didn't get saved because it doesn't work that way. And therefore, the Torah's Kainim spells it out. Go in with any unconditional. You're not thinking you're going to get saved because we need you to get saved. That's why that answers question 2 very, very strongly. And this is an interesting definition of Kiddush Hashem. Kiddush Hashem, according to the Torah's Kainim's description, is not to die for Hashem, but to live miraculously for Hashem. Rashi, let's go over to the Rambam. That's the other extreme. Rashi is going to be in the middle. Rambam calls Kiddush Hashem, the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, surrender your life. Not talking about salvation or miracles. No. What is the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem? They put my life on the line to denounce my faith. I'm ready to give up my life. In fact, ultimately the Rambam sees the highest Kiddush Hashem that I actually give up my life, God forbid. That's it. Rambam makes no mention of the whole business of being spared miraculously and not being spared miraculously. He's not into that. Because Rambam sees the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem just about giving up your life. Rashi splits the difference. See how the Rebbe analyzes the text. Rashi says that the mitzvah, it's not a two-step mitzvah. I should surrender my life and I should trigger the salvation from Hashem. No. I can't control what Hashem does. I should surrender my life. But the hope is that Hashem will make a salvation, and that would make the icing on the cake. That would make the Kiddush Hashem complete. But that's not a mitzvah on me. You can't give me a mitzvah that Hashem should save me. That's not a mitzvah on me. It's a mitzvah on Hashem. And therefore, Rashi doesn't count it as a mitzvah on my screen. In Titus Kainim column, I'm giving you 2 steps. The mitzvah is 1 and 2. In Rashi, there's only 1 step, even though there's a hope for result. Yeah, it would be nice if you save yourself miraculously, but that's not a mitzvah. On the pshat level, you can't command me that I should be saved by a miracle. However, we would like that to happen. And therefore, Rashi does speak about the idea of going there and not doing it on the condition of a miracle, so that you shouldn't get in the way of it happening. Remember what the Rebbe asked? That in the Torah's Kainim, it gives you both sides. If you surrender depending on a miracle, it ain't going to happen. If you don't depend, it will happen. Rashi only says the first part. Because he's not like Torah's Kainim telling it's your responsibility to make sure that you have the right intention so that it happens. You're not responsible to make it happen. That's not part of the mitzvah, according to Rashi. But don't be in the way of it happening. Don't impede it. And if you have a thought waiting the miracle, that will impede it. Don't impede it. Why should you impede it? It's a better result. But it's not a mitzvah on you, and that's why Rashi is much more brief, and he only says one side of the conversation. Whereas Rambam doesn't say any of it. I want to explain these three arguments over here, these three positions, more concretely by giving an example. See, again, to recap, Teres Kainim says the mitzvah has two parts. Number one, I have to be prepared to give my life. That's my action. And number two is I need to do what I can to trigger the result of my action. Look at line 18, because the word v'nikdashti is translated, it's an expression of a command, but it's also an expression of a passive result. It doesn't say v'kidashtem oti, it says v'nikdashti. I will become hallowed, I'll become holy. And therefore it's a result, it's a passive thing. But on the other hand, it is a commandment. The whole text, the whole context here is commandments. How could you have both? And the answer is there's a certain thing that you're commanded to do, and there's a certain thing that's the commanded result. How could you have such a thing? So the example that I found is, for example, the mitzvah pirbi, the mitzvah be fruitful and multiply. The mitzvah is that you should have kids. Even though you can't make it happen, you can only do your part. The rest is up to Hashem. However, if I did my part and God forbid I wasn't blessed with children, nobody's going to complain to me, but I did not do the mitzvah. The mitzvah has two parts. So that's an example of a mitzvah where the mitzvah includes an action and a hoped for result. That's part and parcel of a mitzvah. I mean, so much so that if you don't have to have a boy and a girl, if I have two boys or two girls, it's very nice, but I didn't fulfill my mitzvah. You could say it's not up to me. God could have 6 boys or 6 girls. He didn't yet fulfill the mitzvah. It's not like he's not trying. It doesn't matter. Sometimes, it's not up to us. But the reality is that this is the definition of the mitzvah, be fruitful and multiply. What does it mean? You should do your part, obviously. But part of the mitzvah it's a tough one. Hashem sets us up that we have to do whatever we can, and the result is like sort of our responsibility, even though it's not up to us. Too bad. Hashem should spare us, and Baruch Hashem, today we're able to help with some medical miracles as well. But the bottom line is the mitzvah includes 1 and 2. Your action and the result of your action are your responsibility. What's an example to Rashi's approach? Where the mitzvah has an action, and then it has a hope for result, but this hope for result is not your responsibility. So the example that I'm suggesting is the mitzvah of Avos Hashem. Rambam says, according to the Rambam and the way the Rebbe describes it in the Sichas, what does it mean to love Hashem? How could you command me to love? You can't command emotion. Says Rambam, the mitzvah is that you should learn about Hashem and meditate his bonus and Hashem's greatness. And the way the Rebbe explains it in Likutei Sichas, the response, I'm not responsible to have the love. That's not up to me. My responsibility is to learn the chassidus, to learn and meditate about Hashem. The hope for result is the love, but that's not a commandment on me. That'll either come or it won't come. That's how the Rebbe translate that mitzvah in the Likutei Sichas. I want to give credit where it's due. These 2 examples I was shared with me by a bacher in 770 by the name of Hendel, who writes a likud every week on the Sicha. So he shared for me these 2 examples. An example where the mitzvah and its result are both part and parcel of the mitzvah, namely, be fruitful and multiply. And a mitzvah where the mitzvah is the actual action, even though there's a hope for result. But it's not, you can't call it part of the mitzvah because you can't command me to have a result. Whereas Rambam is very straightforward. Rambam just says that anything to do with the result has nothing to do with you. In fact, we're not even looking for the salvation. We're looking to show the world that our love for Hashem and our faith in Hashem is so strong, until death do we part. And therefore, that is the actual mitzvah, nothing to do with part 2 at all. And in the Sicha, the Rebbe explains what is the background for all of them, as I said earlier. The Teres Kainim is based on the verse. And the verse is written as a command but passive. And therefore the command has two parts, an action and a result, and they're both part of the mitzvah. Let's go Rambam first. Rambam holds halacha means law. It cannot include miraculous stuff. There's no halacha that involves miracles. The Rebbe explains in the footnote, that's why in the laws of building the Beis HaMikdash, the Rambam makes no mention of the shomer worm. That was the only way they were able to chop the mountains. So why doesn't he mention it? And the answer is because it's a miraculous worm. And therefore, it has nothing to do with the world of halacha. It's brought in Medrashim, it's brought in Gemara, whatever it is, but it's not going to be brought in halacha. Halacha is a law book telling me what to do. I can't do the miracle of the shomer. Hashem does that. And therefore, it's not relevant. Similarly, the Rebbe says in the laws of Mashiach, the Rambam says the Mashiach will build a Beis HaMikdash. Why doesn't he go by the opinion that Beis HaMikdash will come down from heaven? Why doesn't he at least allude to it? There are plenty of sources in Medrash and Gemara that that's how it might happen. And the answer is yes, but not in a halacha book. Anything that's not up to us is not going to make it into a halacha book. Halacha is about what you got to do. There are other works of the Rambam and letters of the Rambam, which will speak about miraculous times. But in the halacha, he doesn't speak about miraculous times, even in the time of Mashiach. Because that's not about halacha. Halacha is what we got to do. What we got to do is within our control, is only nature. So based on this, it all becomes crystal clear. We answered the Rebbe's two questions. We see the nuanced differences between the Teres Kainim and Rashi, and the huge difference between Rambam and the Teres Kainim, even though the Teres Kainim is his source. As Rambam considered Teres Kainim his source, what does he do with the rest of it? And we're going to see in a second, in the next screen, the Teres Kainim goes on and on. So the way that Rebbe interprets it, Rambam sees the rest of the Teres Kainim as just an interesting narrative, a story. People had miracles. He's going to say soon more. We had Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. They were thrown into the fire, etc., etc. Teres Kainim is a medrash. It has a lot of things besides law. Whereas Rambam sees just the first line as the law. Rashi, though, recognizes the Teres Kainim that the extension is also part of law, except as we said earlier, on the pshat level. Rashi is the middle column. On the pshat level, he can't accept either. He can't accept Rambam on a pshat level. It makes no sense, says the Rebbe, that a Jew being killed for being a Yid is a Kiddush Hashem. And it's, on a pshat level, it makes no sense. And the Rebbe brings in the footnotes, if you look at the verses of Torah and Tanakh, it says the opposite. Why will the nation say, Aye Elokeim, where's their God? You can hear the Rebbe saying this. On a pshat level? Oh no, midrashic level. Oh no, I'm sorry, on a Rambam level, on a halachic level, maybe. That's Mesiras Nefesh because it looks nice that a Yid is such a muna. I can hear it. But on a pshat level, you're teaching this to a 5-year-old child and you're telling him that it makes sense in pshat, that a Yid is strong in his faith and he gets killed for it, that this makes God look good? Conversely, though, for Rashi to say what the Teres Kainim says, that the mitzvah is that you should, through your action and your faith and your sacrifice, cause that Hashem should save you, that also doesn't fit in Pshat. In Pshat, I'm not in control of the results, I'm in control of my action. And therefore Rashi splits the difference. He doesn't leave it at just dying. Dying is not okay. But you're not in control of the total result. And therefore, he just says, as said earlier, only half of it, point out, do what you can not to impede the possible salvation, because that is the hoped for result. Now that we have these three ways. So the Rebbe, I'm giving you a little more detail. The Rebbe then shows how this spells itself out in the rest of the language, which I put on the screen here. It's further elucidated by the respective texts. Teres Kainim says, as we said before, that the mitzvah definition is 1 and 2. Surrender your life with faith, but the goal is the Kiddush Hashem, and that's part of the mitzvah that you should be saved. And therefore he waxes poetic with a whole long thing that we see about Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. that they told Nebuchadnezzar Hashem could save us from fire. I tried to keep things short for the spreadsheet, but it's even longer than this. They told Nebuchadnezzar Hashem could save us. There's nothing you can do. He can save us. And even if he doesn't save us, we still wouldn't bow to your idol. And he goes on with another king, Mayanas, who grabbed two brothers, Papas and Landis, and the king said to them, let God save you, the same way he saved Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. I guess he knew the story. He teased them. And they said they were righteous. We're not so righteous. Plus, you're not worthy like Nebuchadnezzar that a miracle should come through you. And in fact, the miracle happened. The king was killed. There's discussion in the footnote whether or not they were spared as well. The miracle happened. Why is this all relevant? The Torah's Kingdom is teaching us the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, surrender your life. So it should have just said, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and Papas and Lunis were prepared to surrender their life. He has to go on about their whole converse in the Torah's Kingdom. And these are not things that are not written. They're written in the book of Daniel. They're written explicitly. But the Torah's Kingdom quotes it, that they told Nebuchadnezzar, Hashem could save us from fire. And if he doesn't, we're still ready, but he could. So you see both sides. Because they were not relying on the miracle. That's why they said, even if he doesn't, because that's important, don't rely on the miracle because it won't happen. Then you're like Haran, you have no faith. But we want the miracle and we're expecting it. It could happen. It's a yin and a yang. Don't expect the miracle, but rely on it. It could happen, but if not, we're still ready to die. Why? Because according to Torah's Kingdom, this is part and parcel of the mitzvah, not just to be ready to die, but to be saved. Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah are poster boys, not just that they were ready to die, but they had such a emunah that caused the salvation. That's the Kiddush Hashem. According to Torah's Kingdom, it's very hard to do this mitzvah. You have to be a tzaddik like them to get it done. And then he brings again the king Marinus and these two brothers. And the whole conversation, let God save you. They said he could, but we may not be worthy. You may not be worthy. What does this all show? That Kiddush Hashem represents that Hashem should shine through you. You may not be worthy. We may not be worthy. It may happen. It did happen. But they warned him it may not happen, not because Hashem is not great, but because you and I may not be worthy of this miracle happening to save us, or in the case of the king, happening through you. Why is this whole narrative important in the middle of a Torah's Kingdom? Because this is the definition of this mitzvah, that not only should you do it and be prepared to die, but you should be saved so Hashem looks good. And they said, yeah, but I'm not sure. If you're worthy of making Hashem look good, you have to be on a certain level to get such a miracle. It doesn't happen every time. So all of this stuff is showing that the resultant salvation is part of the mitzvah. And that's the Torah's Kingdom, which I said is the source, as said earlier, of the Rambam and Rashi. But look at Rambam and Rashi, cut it down, as they often do. But in Rashi, he just says, surrender your life, be prepared to die, but don't do it on a condition of being saved. And he proves, like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they didn't do it on the condition of a miracle. And then he stops. He doesn't go through the whole thing. But they said, we could die. We don't want to die. Hashem's going to save us from the fire. The result is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is your action. But the salvational result is a hope. Like we said earlier in the example of the mitzvah of loving Hashem, that the focus is on the Isbaranus, on the meditation. But the result that you should love Hashem is the hoped for result, even though you're not responsible for that result. And therefore, the least you can do, though, is not impede it. Don't disturb it. That's the language of the Sicha. Nichten. Don't do something to disturb it. So I'm not responsible to have a kavanah that I'm ready to die. But don't have a kavanah, don't have an intention that I'm going to be saved because I'm getting in the way of it. Don't get in the way of it. If it happens, but don't impede it. And that's what he says. This is what becomes the result. Don't obstruct the resultant salvation. Rambam doesn't mention salvation at all, as we said earlier. Rambam just says, surrender your life, faith in Hashem for all to see. If you have to die, die. That is the Kiddush Hashem according to Rambam. End of story. But he also quotes the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Nominally, you might say because he's quoting from Teres Kainim, but he quotes it in an inverse way completely. Teres Kainim quotes them that they're a poster boy for being saved. Rambam says they're a poster boy for being ready to die. Quote, like Shanani, Mishal, Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva and his friends, they actually died and martyrs. And then the Rambam continues, these are the Haruge Malchus, the martyrs of kings. There's no greater level above theirs. Ein Maila al Ma'alosam. And he quotes verses. We were killed for you all day. Olecha ragnu kol hayom. Isvul ichsidei kosi brisi al izabach. My righteous who keep my covenant over slaughter. Misspelling, doesn't matter. Which verses in the Torah would say this is what it means to be dedicated to Hashem. In Rambam, there's nothing here about salvation. There's here about surrender. Even the Chaimani V'Shav Azariah part, he brings them in the same vein as Rabbi Akiva. They're ready to die. The fact that they didn't die is inconsequential to Rambam. Because as we said earlier in Halacha, miracles cannot be accounted for. They're not up to you, and therefore they're not Halacha. And the Rebbe shows, to make it even sweeter, Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Rambam's other work, where he writes a similar language. Sefer HaMitzvah, in very short, defines each mitzvah. He defines a mitzvah. The mitzvah is to publicize faith in a God. Because you're even ready to be in the face of danger and death, and you surrender yourself. This is the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, just like Hanani, Mishal, and Azariah. So it's a whole different definition of the mitzvah, the way Rashi, or certainly the way Teres Kainim, they would see the mitzvah is you're going to make a miracle, that Hashem's going to show a miracle. Thanks to you. What a beautiful mitzvah. It's wonderful, but that happens to tzaddikim. You can't make that a law in Rambam. The mitzvah in halacha is that I publicize faith in Hashem. Hashem looks good, not that he made a miracle, but it looks good that he has people that believe in him so much. And yes, he quotes Hanani, Mishal, and Azariah, which I brought from the Teres Kainim, but not in the context of salvation, but in the context of preparing to die. The Rebbe says further, the Sefer HaMitzvahs, this language here, it's a very beautiful Rambam, that Hanani, Mishal, and Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and his friends, the language is Ein Maila Ma'alosam. It's very painful, Rambam, but it's beautiful when you think of, soldiers that are being killed on the front lines, and you recognize, as sad as it is, they're on the highest level. They're with Rabbi Akiva and his friends. Ein Maila Ma'alosam. So the Rebbe says, here too you see the emphasis, that this is part of the definition of the mitzvah. Why? Because Rambam's source is Gemara, this particular line, that the Harugim Malchus, these great souls who were killed like Kiddush Hashem, the source is in Gemara, but over there it doesn't say Ein Maila al Ma'alosam. There's no higher level of Avodas Hashem. The Gemara says Ein Adam Yochalam b'mechitzasam. No one could stand in their space in Gan Eden in the other world. Rambam deviates from it. Because remember, Rambam is focused on halacha. He's not focused on reward. Reward is Hashem's business. So the Gemara speaks of it as reward. God forbid this should happen, you should know nobody could stand in their place in Gan Eden. You think of the Bibas family, I don't know. No one could stand in their place in Gan Eden. It's a reward. But Rambam, as a faithful to his mission of halacha, he's using that Gemara and applying it to halacha. It's the highest level mitzvah. That's what halacha means, telling you about the mitzvah, telling what you got to do, not what Hashem is going to do. And therefore he deviates just ever so slightly from the Gemara. Instead of saying no one could stand in their space in Gan Eden, he says Ein Maila Ma'alosam. There's no greater Avodas Hashem, because Rambam, again, halacha, speaks the language of calling you to action. What's the takeaway from this? The first takeaway is we want Mashiach now. We should never need to activate these mitzvahs. But I'm thinking that, and the Rebbe is telling us this, it's a painful subject, obviously. I thought about it. I needed for myself to have some kind of positive walk away from this. The different opinions, the different approaches, let's call it from Rashi versus Teres Kainim, and the Rambam. So here's what I'm taking from it. This, you could take this or leave it. That from a Rashi level, that means Pshuta Shel Mikra, from the text level of Torah. it's expected that a Yid should be saved. That's what Rashi says, echoing much closer to the Tzchayas Kainim himself. As the Rebbe says in the Sicha, on a pshat level, you're telling me that God looks good when Jews get killed for being Jewish? On a pshat level, it means on the level of the text of Torah. Let's translate that. What is expected of Hashem? The Yidden should never be killed for being Jewish. It's unacceptable. On a halacha level, what is expected of us? That we don't ask any questions. They're different. You could say this is what Torah teaches us, these two extremes, and this is what the Rebbe really taught us. On the one hand, we scream Ad Masai, and we tell Hashem it makes no sense. On the other hand, God forbid, we should never ever be tested. But God forbid if somebody is tested, the Jewish way is to say, Baruch Dayan Hamas, we accept it. How do you square these two things? If it's unacceptable, if it makes no sense, how could it be? The tzaras that people face, and etc., all the tragedies that people face. And what do? But it happens in our own communities. Young people just go up to Shemayim, and all we say is Baruch Dayan Hamas. We bless Hashem, like we accept it, including the closest family members. How do they live on? But we believed in you, Hashem, and it doesn't make any sense. It's a Chilul Hashem, not a Kiddush Hashem. And the answer is both are true. We know what Hashem's perspective should be, and I guess we remind him in our prayers and in screaming Ad Masai, and we're clear about it, and that's Rashi, that's the Torah, Shutta Shal Mikra. The Torah perspective is Hashem needs to bring Mashiach. It's impossible that there should be a death. It's a Chil Hashem. And in the meantime, though, Halacha tells us we're still Halachic Jews. We're going to do what Hashem wants, even and until the day when we don't have any answers. And it don't look right, and it makes no sense. That doesn't affect us. That's Hashem's cheshbon, and he'll deal with it. But us, we're going to serve him until that day when we don't have to go through this challenge. We accept the challenge. We want Mashiach now.